So obviously the part about After Effects that is intimidating is the animating part of things. So right now this is just a glorified Photoshop file that we haven't really done anything with. So we want to add some movement and some interest to this project so that we can create some sort of compelling video. So the way to do that is by using, most of the time by animating something, is we're going to use keyframes. And that's just what we're going to go through in this video, is how to set keyframes on certain things. So we're going to animate this hideous little design into a short little animation. So again, like we talked about, this is your timeline. So whatever is inside of this timeline is really what's going to be rendered out. And if you wanted to make a super long timeline, so we made this like 14 seconds long, then this is what will be your final project. If you just want to make this 6 seconds long, what you want to do is you have these little brackets right here, and you can click and drag these little blue brackets. So whatever's really inside of this, these blue brackets is what's going to render out. So if you just wanted to do like a short test, you could do like a 4 to 6 second test of something that's happening right there. So just know whatever's inside of these is what will render out. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Okay, so what is a keyframe and how do I use it? Let's start with our name. So I'm going to go to this text layer right here, and we're going to talk about how to add keyframes to the transform properties. So as we said, these little layers have these special layer properties to them, and we're going to adjust the transform options. I'm going to go down here, toggle these down, and we're going to move this around. So what we're going to do is have our name just slide up from the bottom up to the top. So the way to do that is by setting a keyframe, and the property that we want to adjust would be the position, because we want it to move from bottom to top. So you're going to set a keyframe, and the way I'm going to do that is by using this little stopwatch that is next to these parameters. So for position, if I go over here and I click on this little stopwatch, it's going to turn blue, and it's going to add a little diamond to my timeline, and this is right here is what you call a keyframe. So it's set on about 5.5 seconds, and that is where it is locking. It's basically saying at 5.5 seconds, this layer is going to be right here. So if I want it to start at the very bottom, I need to take my playhead and move it all the way down here to the very beginning. And now I need to, you can move it. You can move it just from in the screen, or you can move it by your position property. But most of the time, I'll just click up here, and if that layer is selected right, I'll just click and drag it down. And again, you want to make sure you have that position or that selection tool selected. So again, I'm just going to click and drag it down, and you can see now I'm getting this line that is on this layer, and that is showing that there's a path now for this text. So I'm going to click and drag it down, and so you can see that as soon as I clicked it, it added a new keyframe to this layer. And so now I have a keyframe that is all the way down here at 0 seconds, and if I scroll through now, you can see that is pulling my name up to its main point here. Now one thing that I am going to do is I'm going to change where my anchor point is, and I'm going to do that. I'm pretty much just going to start over, because if I try to do it now, it's going to mess up my position. So if you don't like where your anchor point is, you can go and adjust it like we said earlier. So I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard, and I want my position or my anchor point to be on, just for now, just dead center of my text layer. Okay, that's fine. So now let's go through this one more time to talk about the position. So I want to make sure my layer is selected. I'm going to go to the position tab, and again, you can just select that by hitting P on the keyboard. I'm going to click on that stopwatch to make a keyframe, and now I'm at 5.5 seconds. I'm going to slide down here, and I'm going to click and drag my name down to the bottom. Just going to move it right outside of the window, and I also want to make sure I hold down Shift so that it moves it in a perfectly straight line. You don't have to. You can move it over here, over there, but I'm just going to pull it down here to the bottom. All right, so like we said, we now have a keyframe set at 0 and a keyframe set at 5.5, and as I move my playhead through, you can see that it's animating through here. Okay, so how do you play back what you have created? So with After Effects, you have to get used to the fact that you have to render your scene before you really watch it. So in Premiere, if you're doing simple video editing, it plays in real time, but in After Effects, it has to process the things that you've told it to do, and we call that by rendering. So for me, I have a numerical keypad on my keyboard. So if I just hit 0 on the keypad, it'll start kind of caching that animation, and we'll start playing back what's going on. So you can see that this line is turning green, and that's just saying that it's now processed all this stuff on what's going on. And so once this fills up, it'll play back in real time. This scene's a bit long, so I don't need it to be this long. So I'm just gonna move my playhead over here, and I'm gonna hit N on the keyboard, and that's just a shortcut to move that bracket this way, or you can just drag it with your mouse. So now if I hit 0 on the keyboard, everything's been rendered, and now you can see that it's moving in real time. So that's one way to preview it. If you don't have a numerical keypad, on your keyboard, you can just use the space bar to watch that back as well. Okay, so we've got our animation moving, and obviously this is a little bit slow. We wanted this to happen pretty quickly. So the cool thing is we can just take our keyframe. We don't have to go in here and set a new one. We can just take this one and we can just drag it down here. So I'm just going to click and drag, and we're going to move it to like 2 seconds. And now it needs to kind of process that again because I moved it and it's totally different than what it was, and it'll play back in real time. There we go. Okay, so we have our name moving in there, and we can also move our circle. So we can do the same thing. So we can just click on this. And maybe we want to do something different than just have it slide up in this position. So let's do the scale. So I'm gonna hit S on the keyboard, and we want the circle to be this size at this moment. So I'm just gonna click on that stopwatch right there. That looks good. I'm gonna take my playhead all the way back here, and we will just scale this down to 0. So I'm just gonna click on that 100% and hit 0, and then hit enter. So now that circle is completely small. You can't even see it. Now it's gonna scale up, and there it goes right there. But now you can see that my anchor point was way over there. Shape layers are a little bit tricky in that sense that you need to draw them on in a little bit different way. I'll quickly show you that just so you have an idea of how it works. I'm going to delete this one for now. We'll just draw a new shape layer. So I'm going to go up here to this circle, click on that, and let's just turn off the stroke. I don't want the stroke anymore. And now I want to draw this circle from the center of this entire project. So I'm just going to put my little crosshair right there on that center crosshair. I'm going to click and drag, and it's going to draw this random square or random circle over here, and that's not really what I want. But if I hold down Shift, it's going to lock into a nice perfect circle. And then if I hold down Command, it will scale it from the middle. So now the anchor point will be locked in right in the center. So let's just go right about there. So I'm just going to let go of my mouse, and now I have that circle, and I want to move that down below my name. There we go. So let's take this shape layer. Let's hit S on the keyboard. Let's lock in a keyframe by clicking that stopwatch. And I can come back down here, and I can just scale this down to 0. So now I'm going to hit circle on the numerical pad, and it's going to scale up. So you can see my circle is scaling, and my name moved up into place. So really anything that has a stopwatch next to it can be given a keyframe for your animation. So for instance, let's go up to this adjustment layer we added, which had that blur on it. So if I were to bump this blur all the way up, and now I can adjust this with this stopwatch keyframe. You can see right there by the blur radius that I have a option to add a keyframe. So I'm going to go to my beginning option, or beginning of my animation, and I'm going to lock a keyframe in right there. So I want it to be super blurry at the very beginning, and right around this section here I want it to come into focus. So I'm going to click on that stopwatch or that number and hit 0, and now it's going to be no blur whatsoever. We've added some keyframes, but I can't really see them, and the way to see them for me is just if you click on a layer and you hit U on the keyboard, it'll show you any keyframes you have selected, and sometimes if you hit U twice, it'll show you even more properties. And you can see down here that now we have these 2 keyframes that we added, and that is on the effects option of the box blur. So let's take a look at it again and see what we have working with. So that circle sort of is slowly coming into focus, and really the more stuff you add to your project, the slower it's going to take to render, especially with blur or even motion blur and things like that. Okay, so there's this little animation moving right there. So essentially that's how keyframes work. You can do this with color correction, you can do this with all sorts of things, so definitely play with those. Now the next step that we want to do is make this look a little bit better, and the fact that it's sliding in, but it stops so abruptly and is just not very cool looking. So let's do one thing. I'm going to show you, this is a bit technical, but will just elevate your project a whole lot. What I want to do is make this animation right here. I want to make my name slide in, but not be so robotic. I want it to kind of fly in super fast and then come to a really slow stop. The way I'm going to do that is click on my name layer, and really I want to adjust my keyframe just a little bit. It's not right in the center, and it's kind of bugging me. So I'm going to make sure I put my playhead right on top of that keyframe, because if I'm over here and I try to adjust, like, my name's not quite right, if I move it down a little bit, it's going to make another keyframe. And so now it's going to come up and it's going to go back down, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I adjust the original keyframe that I had, so I need to put my playhead right on top of that original keyframe. And if you hold down Shift, that playhead will lock onto keyframes a lot easier than you having to do it manually. So there we go. Now I want to adjust that one just a little bit, so I'm going to slide it down. I'm going to hold down Shift so that it slides straight down. There we go, just a little bit. Now I want to make my name fly in super fast and come to a really slow stop. So the way I want to do that is I want to highlight my keyframes. So I'm going to click and drag just over here and just highlight these two. The next thing I'm going to do is click on this little option right here. And this is a graph editor. So if you click on that, it's going to pull up another window. And you're going to have this sort of this line graph going on. And this isn't quite what we want yet. I'm going to go back here. I just want to show you that really quickly. I'm going to go back here, make sure these are highlighted. And if you right click, if you put your mouse right on the top of that keyframe and you right click, you can go down to the Keyframe Assistant. And I'm going to go up here to Easy Ease. And you can set your own. I've set my own custom keyboard shortcut because I use this all the time just as the number 1, but you can make this whatever you want. So I'm going to click on Easy Ease, and you can see that it's going to change my keyframes just a little bit. So now I'm going to play back. And right now it basically this is saying I'm going to ease into the animation and I'm going to ease out of the animation. So it doesn't come to a complete stop so fast, but it could be maybe a little bit. You can see it's smoothed out just a little bit, but now we want to make it even smoother. So I'm going to highlight those keyframes, click on that graph editor that we talked about, and now you can see this graph is totally different. So it's saying it's kind of starting off slow, going super fast, and then coming slow. If yours doesn't look like this, you can go down here to this little option here and go to Edit Speed Graph. This is the one you want to look at right here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag my keyframe right here, and this is that ending keyframe. And once I highlight it, it's going to give me these little yellow handles. And if I click that dot and drag it to the left, now it's saying, all right, I'm going to go super fast, and then I'm going to go really slow over the next second and a half. So if I turn this off and we watch this back, now you can see my name like launches into space, and then it's going to really slow down at the end. So let's watch that back. So there you can see it goes really fast and then really slow. And that's basically just what's happening with that graph editor that we used. Okay, the blur is a little bit too long, so I'm just going to take that keyframe and drag it down there. And we can watch that back. This will help you understand that animation takes so much time when you're trying to watch back what you did. Okay, very good. Same thing goes for our shape layer, as we can highlight these. You can do right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, click on this little stopwatch. And now you can adjust that scale right there. Okay, let's watch that back. Okay, so things are already looking a lot smoother right away. And a little more professional. Obviously this is pretty bland, but now you can see we have some pretty interesting. It feels a little more organic and a little more natural to what our brains would expect. So you can set as many keyframes as you want really on a layer. So if I wanted my name to sort of fade out, then I can click on this and I can hit T on the keyboard for that opacity tool. Click on that stopwatch to make a keyframe. Take my cursor right down here and then pull that number down to maybe 0. And so now, it slides up. It's having the keyframe by position. It comes into place and then it can slowly fade out right there. So everything is controlled pretty much by keyframes when you get down to just the basics of animation. Now, without going too slow, I just want to show you the options that are available with some of these layers. So we talked about with the text layers and the shape layers that there's other properties that you can use to animate. And there's tons of other tutorials out there that I recommend you diving into. But I'll just show you really quickly a couple little things that you can do with some of these other options inside of these special layers. So with shape layers, so for instance, if I wanted to add another, maybe like a stroke to the outside of this, so I could go to the shape layer, I could toggle this down, I could hit add here, and I could go to add stroke. I could add another stroke to this if I wanted as well. Bump it up, but for me, I like to keep all these separate. So you could do tons of things just to this one shape layer, but for me, I like to keep them separate. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to duplicate this. Now, I like where my circle is. I don't want to have to go in and click on the shape layer and make another circle, but this is exactly where I want it. So I'm just going to click on the shape layer, hit duplicate, and now I want to make a layer just for the stroke. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to add. I'm going to go to add stroke. And I'm going to toggle this down here. I'm just going to bump up that size a good bit. So now I have this stroke. Problem is I don't want this fill on here. I don't want this dark layer on that one. I want this one just to be the stroke. So to make sure that I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to go down here and turn off our original circle. And I want to open up the ellipse option right there. And you can see that there's a stroke there and a fill there. I can just turn off that fill right there. And really I could turn this one back on and use this one, but we've already added our own, so that's fine. So I'm going to use the stroke, and I can, now I can change my width here however you want. But to show you just some of the options that you can do within the animation of these shape layers, I can go to add. I could do something like trim paths, which I use a lot, and I can toggle this down so it adds this little extra menu for this shape layer. And basically this is saying, all right, you want to trim this path, you want to have a kind of a start and an end. And if you adjust these numbers, you can see that it's sort of animating these circles here. So I could maybe put this at 0, click on that stopwatch like we talked about, maybe bring this down here, put my playhead somewhere around here, and then I can take this and bump that up right there. So now you can see that it's made 2 keyframes. So I have 0, and it's going to spin that circle around, and there it is. And it also has, if I click on that shape layer and I hit U on the keyboard, it's going to show me all the keyframes I have. So I also have that scale on there that we've already added, so it's kind of scale up and draw that circle. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's still a little bit uninteresting. It's kind of boring, so I'm going to toggle these back down, and we can go to even the offset. So I could come back down here, and I could click on offset, pull this down here, and I'm not going to spending too much time on this. I just want to show you really quickly. I'm going to bump up this offset a good bit. So now it's going to basically change that path. It's going to sort of rotate. You can see this point now is moving along with it as well. So again, tons of things you can do with it. That was just a quick little example. You can do so much with these shape layers and make it really cool if you just play around with it some. So that's how we do that. I could turn back on our shape layer there, and then I could, I like the scale we have, so I could go into this contents, and I could go in just to the path itself and scale this down. So now it's sort of offset a little bit like that. Pretty simple, not a whole lot to it. But this just gives you a great introduction to how to drop some layers in here and mess around with some keyframes. So in the next tutorial, we're going to go through how to use other compositions within compositions and build out a full scene to get you started on making your own full project from start to finish.